Today I'm going to give you a concise overview of my writing process from the initial seed of an idea through the rough draft. This is my essential process whether I am writing a novel or a work of nonfiction. Luciana requested this video, so here it is. And if there are any aspects of any of these three steps that you would like me to dive deeper into, I would be happy to do that in a future video. Just leave me a comment below with your request. So let's get started breaking it down, three-step process. Step 1, collecting seeds that may or may not develop into viable story ideas. 2, choosing which seeds to cultivate through research and other forms of exploration. 3, organizing your idea and completing a first draft of your story. Of course, I'm saying you instead of I here because I hope that this video will be helpful to you in developing your own writing process. These are fundamental steps, but we each follow them in our own unique way. I like to say that as a writer, you're always working and you're never working. You're never working because it's fun work, and you're always working because a part of your brain is continually scanning for fodder and inspiration. It is a part of who you are. It's part of your job description. In a certain sense, you must become a sort of opportunist if you want to be a writer who consistently comes up with fresh and actionable ideas. Now, as you can see, I do a fair amount of traveling, but you don't have to get on a plane in search of inspiration. The key is to explore your surroundings wherever you may be, to say yes to opportunities you may otherwise have been reluctant to try. Look for what is unusual and intriguing, and you will find it. You're essentially creating a unique database of details, vignettes, and images you can draw from later on when the time is ripe. Capture the idea with your pen or your phone. Make sure you save it for later. If you're in a hurry, sometimes a few words are sufficient to recall that idea later. Just make sure that they're specific enough that you won't look back on your note a day or two later and wonder what the heck you were getting at. Wherever I'm living, my bedroom tends to look pretty much as it did when I was living in college dorm rooms because surrounding myself with interesting images is more important to me than decorating like a grown-up. I like to think these images will seep into my dreams and fuel my next exciting novel idea. And guess what? Occasionally they do. On those index cards in rows towards the bottom, I've written out ideas, largely other people's ideas, that my intuition tells me, hey, it's important that you not lose track of this. Right now, they're mostly ideas for my writing about ethical veganism. And speaking of surrounding myself with other people's ideas, here's a quick note on the concept of originality. As advertising executive John Hegarty writes in his book, Hegarty on Creativity, There Are No Rules, there is no such thing as originality. By definition, nothing can be truly original. Originality is dependent upon the obscurity of your sources. So the more out of the way and unpredictable your sources of inspiration, the more fresh and exciting your ideas are going to seem to your reader. Conversely, let's use Marvel movies and comic books as an example. If those are your primary source of inspiration, your reader is going to have the sense that they've experienced your story or something quite like it many times before, and that's because they have. As Hegarty writes, the value of an idea is in how it draws its inspiration from the world around us and then reinterprets it in a way we haven't seen before. And in the case of my next book on veganism and creativity, I'm drawing together ideas that at first glance seem like they don't connect or inform one another. It becomes my job to articulate those connections, and that's what makes the work feel fresh. It's not that I'm thinking entirely new thoughts, but I am making new connections between thoughts. I find inspiration in lots of places, and what's fascinating to me is going to be quite different from that particular stew of what's fascinating for you. Here's a look at the Florentine Notebook I wrote about in Life Without Envy. I used this notebook at various times over the first 10 years or so of my writing career, and in reviewing it years later, I found a great deal of inspiration for that book. The key is here that I didn't know what I was working towards. I was gathering ideas before I knew what I was gathering them for. You collect seeds even as a small child, long before you know what you're doing, before you're an artist. When you're playing What If and other games of the imagination, you're already working from your collection of seeds. Then and now, your intuition is guiding you whether you realize it or not. Also, keep in mind that you won't end up using many of the ideas or seeds of ideas you'll gather, and that's okay. I try to keep in mind that some ideas are actually stepping stones to other, more actionable ideas. Don't judge a seed when you feel that little ping of excitement. Go ahead, collect it, capture it, because you never know what it's going to grow into. As for which ideas you ultimately choose to cultivate into stories, I like to say the idea chooses you. It demands to be cultivated. It continually nudges itself into the center of your attention until you commit to it. And then after you commit to it, it's always there too. And you have to love it. You have to be completely enamored with this idea. You have to think about it and dream about it all day and all night long. That's how you know that this is the idea for you. We'll get into research and outlining in a minute, but I just want to give you 2 concrete examples of how a seed develops into a fully formed idea. Here are 2 examples from my novels. My debut novel, Mary Modern, is about a scientist who clones her grandmother. The idea came to me as I was reflecting on my great-grandparents' engagement portrait, which my Aunt Eileen had given me as a gift. Here are Anna and Paul at the beginning of their life together. They had no way of knowing that Anna would die at the age of 33 after giving birth to their 5th child, or that Paul wouldn't be able to shoulder the responsibility of caring for 5 little girls, mostly on his own. I imagined that through some sort of time slip, Anna and I were able to meet one another, and I wondered what we would say to each other, and Mary Modern was the result. Here's the second example. On the left, I had made a new friend who had told me about seeing a homeless man dying on the steps of a hospital in India. The man had a huge wound in his head, but all of the hospital staff completely ignored him. On the right, you see how I indirectly wove this example of inhumanity into my fiction. My novel Immaculate Heart is about a series of visitations of the Virgin Mary, and at one point the apparition is talking to one of my characters about how people want their prayers answered, but they actually aren't willing to do anything to help answer the desperate prayers of other people. You see what an impression that story made on me. I felt compelled to write it down, and several years later, that seed was ready to be organically incorporated into the story. The plot of a novel tends to develop out of the research. Hours and hours go into reading and fact-gathering, and the vast majority of what I learn doesn't go directly into the book, but it's still important to give myself that knowledge base, particularly when writing historical fiction. In this binder, I keep notes I took from various spiritualist magazines I found at the National Library of Scotland in Edinburgh. These notes have informed Life Without Envy, my novel The Boy from Tomorrow, and another novel I have yet to write. Here I am at Schloss Wernigerode in Germany in the fall of 2008, researching a chapter in my novel Petty Magic, parts of which are set in Germany during World War II. You'll find descriptions of this castle in chapter 25, which are taken from this trip on this day. As for how I organize these scenes and the research that results, well, I am still working on developing a more efficient system, but in the meantime, I will share some strategies that I have used in the past. Check out the 3-part blog series I posted back in 2011 on how I gather, organize, and use ideas. You'll find the links in the video notes below. For now, let's just focus on the early writing and outlining. Earlier on, I showed you a mind map of my latest book, and while I don't always mind map as I'm preparing to write, I find it a really helpful way to sort out the themes, setting, details, the characters, and their dynamics with one another, and in the case of my nonfiction, to make connections between ideas that, as I said, at first might not seem related. This certainly isn't the most eye-catching mind map I've made, but that doesn't matter. It's a private document. This is the most insightful mind map I have ever made. Each time I review it, I get excited all over again to write this novel, and that's a big part of my reason for making them. When it's time to begin outlining chapter by chapter, I generally procrastinate by drafting the first 30 or even 50 pages, just working on whatever scenes I've been most looking forward to writing, the things that just pop into my head and I get jazzed about putting down on paper. These are scenes I know the reader will find compelling because I find them compelling. Now, as for when do I write longhand and when do I draft on the computer, I can lay out this part of the process for you like so. Sometimes I'll type out some notes to myself in the beginning stages of a book project, but for the most part, I'm writing longhand in a combination of notebook, notepad, index cards, mind maps, and random scraps of paper. Step 2 is outlining using Scrivener, followed by a spreadsheet, although I should say that at this stage I'm still using index cards or scrap paper cut into index card-like pieces to rearrange scenes into what will be more or less their final order. I do this with nonfiction projects as well, arranging the cards so that one point naturally leads into the next. Here's a screenshot of the spreadsheet outline of my new children's novel. Originally, I had chapters color-coded, but the book is finished now, so I've removed the color coding. A spreadsheet is a very practical tool for tracking timelines, thematic through lines, your character's itinerary if they happen to be on the move, and so on and so forth. You can eliminate most discrepancies at a glance when you're using a spreadsheet. I use Scrivener for the rough draft. Here's a peek at the file for my new children's novel. It's easy to store all your notes and research in one place, like a virtual trapper keeper, and I also like that you can easily track your word count per chapter. Once the first draft is complete, I switch to Google Docs. This allows me to share a polished draft with my beta readers quite easily. And up until 4 or 5 years ago, I would print the manuscript and make longhand edits, but I've stopped doing that just to save paper. As disorganized as I generally feel, efficiency is still something I strive for. It might seem at first as if creativity and efficiency don't mix, or at least we shouldn't be too much concerned with working efficiently when we are making art. But my reasoning is that I have a lot of stories in me, and I'm not going to live forever. So I'm sitting on a mountain of actionable ideas here, and I want to tell as many of these stories as I possibly can before my time here is up. That's also why I want to improve my methods for organizing my ideas. So there is a bullet journal binder video coming up soonish. That's it for this time. I would love to hear about your own writing process. Tell me about that in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.